Hello, my name is Jeffrey Sanzel. I'm the Artistic Director of Theatre 3, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to Port Jefferson, where we will be hosting the Brookhaven Arts and Humanities Sunrise Sunset Playwright Competition. Today, we are delighted to welcome the world's greatest living playwright, Edward Albee, as our special guest speaker. At this time, why don't we go on inside?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bradley Bing. I will be the moderator for 3 panels for our Sunrise Sunset series. Being a part of this discussion and being a moderator is indeed a privilege. What's even more of a privilege is the fact that today we have with us Mr. Edward Albee. I'd like to read a little bit. At first, the American theater establishment was not ready for Albee's brand of satirical examination values and had difficulty finding producers for his work. Ultimately, The Zoo Story was produced in 1959 and it premiered in Berlin, and Albee gained international fame before being a success in his own country. 1 year later, The Zoo Story opened in New York. A string of other plays followed, including The Sandbox, Fam and Yam, American Dream, and The Death of Bessie Smith, earning him the title of the King of Off-Broadway. Albee's acceptance with the theater establishment occurred with the great Broadway success of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, considered by many to be his masterpiece. This play secured Albee's standing as one of the great dramatists of his time. He received a Tony Award and a Pulitzer Prize nomination. The play was revolutionary because for such a long period after McCarthyism and blacklisting, the arts had been frightened away from social criticism. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf startled mainstream audiences out of their comfortable notions of the American dream and brought challenging theater back to Broadway. In the years after Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Albee continued to pursue an even deeper understanding of the individual's relationship to the modern world. Specifically, he explored man's increasing detachment, seen in A Delicate Balance and Tiny Alice. Some of his better-known recent works include Seascape, The Lady from Dubuque, Marriage Play, and 3 Tall Women, for which he won another Pulitzer Prize in 1994. Edward Albee remains today one of our most celebrated and influential playwrights. In 1996, Albee received the Kennedy Center Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 1997, President Bill Clinton awarded him the National Medal of Arts. At the Kennedy Center Honors Ceremony, Albee was praised for his impact on American drama. Edward Albee burst into the American theatrical scene in the late 1950s with a variety of plays that detail the agonies and disillusionment of the decade and the transition from the placid Eisenhower years to the turbulent 1960s. Albee's plays, with their intensity, their grappling with modern themes, and their experiments in form, startled critics and audiences alike while changing the landscape of American drama. Edward Albee is on a very short list of one of America's finest theatrical writers. It is a pleasure having him, and I'd like to now introduce Mr. Edward Albee. Let me first of all say that we will be having 3 panels. The first panel is our Sunrise panel, and that will be consisting of young playwrights, up-and-coming playwrights, and they'll be talking about their work and asking Mr. Albee and each other about what it means to be a new and upcoming writer. The second panel will be the Sunset panel, and that will be a group of older people more my age, mature, sophisticated, intelligent. And we'll be talking about life's experiences and how that perhaps affects the writer's work and their thinking. The third panel will be consisting of directors and critics, and we'll be looking at what the role is of the director and the critic in looking at and evaluating plays. But this is our first panel. One of the first things we'll be doing is introducing each one of the panel members. But before we start, though, I would like to say, on a personal level, because it's the one thing I get an opportunity to do, Mr. Albee, I have to tell you that I have acted in your plays. I have directed them. I grew up in the Midwest. The very first Broadway play I ever saw was A Delicate Balance. When I left that play, I said, wow. I understood for the first time what was happening within inside me in terms of my own fears about what was going on with my future, Vietnam, things I couldn't identify with. When I walked out of the theater, you had touched me deeply with that play. So I cannot begin to tell you what a privilege it is for me to be here with the playwright of the first Broadway play I ever saw. Now that's my first insight.
You know, there's no point in writing plays unless every once in a while somebody says something as nice as that.
Let's first of all start with some of our panelists. I'd like to start with Sandy. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, my name's Sandy Burhouse. I just graduated from Drew University, and
What university?
Drew University, New Jersey. I studied theater, and I originally went into school thinking that I'd want to focus on acting, and I still enjoy acting, but I really got into writing, and recently I've decided that I'm going to go for it. And it's something I really enjoy, and something I hope to continue studying and working on.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Yeah, I'm Sylvia Krinsky, and I'm still in high school. I'm going into 12th grade, and I mainly write short stories. This was the first play I've ever actually finished, so that's it.
Kelly?
Kelly Jean Fitzsimmons. I graduated from the University of Central Florida at Orlando, Florida. I had a play produced there in the Orlando Fringe Festival. For the last year, I've been acting with a Shakespearean company in Lenox, Massachusetts, Shakespearean Company, where I got the chance to not only act in a lot of really great Shakespeare plays, but work with high schoolers and elementary schoolers doing Shakespearean workshops and helping them put on their own plays. So I'm just in love with theater and especially language. So that's why I really like writing, or trying to.
Elliot?
I'm Elliot Glazer. I'm going to be a senior at Smithtown High School. I wrote Baby Names, which last year was one of the winners of the Young Playwrights Festival last year here, and I do enjoy writing a lot.
Okay, thank you. Well, those are our four Sunrise panelists. Let's start. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask Mr. Albee in terms of what it means to start their career as a playwright?
Well, it's got to be pretty difficult, trying to get yourself into the whole scene, or was it easy? Or?
Well, let's go back a bit here. It took me a long time to figure out that I was a playwright. I thought I was a novelist, and I thought I was a poet, and I thought I was a short story writer, and I may have been, but I was pretty awful at all of those things. So I really, aside from a three-act sex farce I wrote when I was 12 and a half, I didn't write a play until almost my 30th birthday. So I didn't begin anywhere near as a playwright as young as you guys did. And the first play was The Zoo Story. And how difficult was it to get your work produced in those days? Well, it was a rather grumpy, hour-long, unpleasant play set on a park bench in New York City, not your usual Broadway fare, and there was no off-Broadway. So I had my play done in Germany, translated into German, and so I had the, I think, unique experience of being the only American playwright who has ever seen the world premiere of his first play in a language he didn't understand. That was okay. And then that was on a double bill with Beckett's play Krapp's Last Tape. And a year and a half later, Off-Broadway was born, basically, and at the Provincetown Playhouse in New York City, the Zoo Story and Krapp's Last Tape opened. Got, which almost every single one of my plays ever since has gotten, mixed reviews. Some critics thought it was great, some people thought it was awful. That's been the history of my career, with the exception of one play, Three Tall Women, which for some bizarre reason almost everybody liked. I wonder what I did wrong to deserve that. So I don't know how difficult it is now. It's more difficult now, and it's less difficult to get your work done. Back in the 50s and early 60s, the off-Broadway and off-Broadway theater was an exciting place to work. Nobody was particularly interested in making any money. Playwrights made $50 a week if their plays were running. The actors maybe got $25 a week. The ticket prices were $3 and $4. Everybody worked on serious new work because they liked to do it. They were happy. The Zoo Story and Krapp's Last Tape to produce off-Broadway in 1960 cost $2,000 to produce. Now, to do the same double bill with only 3 actors in those 2 plays would cost over $150,000 to do. That makes it a little tougher. People don't mind taking chances when it costs you $2,000. But when it costs you a great deal of money, the knaves become cowards. And it's harder and harder for a young playwright to get the work done in front of an audience that is going to see it, by which I mean an audience that is going to read the reviews that are written about it. And an awful lot of plays, very serious ones, are done and the critics do not go. That's why we have the regional theater outside of New York City, 125 regional theaters around the country, where the work of most young playwrights receives its first performance. And if it is considered safe enough, then it moves to Broadway. So it's a little difficult, and a little different, and a little better, because there are many more theaters that are looking for new young playwrights. But getting those plays from the sensible regional theaters into the commercial market is very difficult. Prices have gone up, the chances have gone up. It's more difficult, but so what? If you're a playwright, you write plays. And you make the assumption that if you've written a halfway decent play, that somewhere there's going to be somebody who wants to take a chance on it and see it. What you must never do as a young playwright is try to guess what they want to see, because you'll become a follower and not a leader. You've got to write whatever you need to write in the way you need to write it. And if you've done it well enough, eventually somebody's going to pay attention and you will be on your way the way you want to be on your way. But don't try to please everybody. Don't try to guess the market. Don't try to write plays that are easy and simple, unless you want to write plays that are easy and simple. But in other words, don't become an employee. When I became a writer, I said to myself, after getting thrown out of college and everything else, I never want to be an employee. I want to be my own boss. And the only way you can be your own boss as a playwright is to write exactly what you feel, the way you feel it, and if they don't like it out there, tough. That answers your question, I hope.
Kelly, your play was performed this morning.
Yes. This morning was very unique for me, mostly because, too, I've never taken any sort of official playwriting class or anything.
Good for you.
And
No, they're no good.
it's interesting watching something that almost like the intonation that I heard in my head is completely different than when it's on stage. And in some ways it was strange or bizarre to make that shift, and sometimes it was something completely original that just excited me to see it done different. Something I never would have thought of until seeing the actors this morning, and now they've given me so much more to think about something that I wrote originally. So being an actress myself, I've never been on both sides of it at the same time.
Did you work with the actors before this reading?
No, I didn't get a chance to. The director was nice enough to call me and talk about some of the things that they were talking about, and I was actually really interested in that, just coming straight full on and seeing, this is what I wrote down on a piece of paper. How is everybody going to take that into their life or bring it to stage? Because I have done a little bit where I've worked in a troupe and we've put on our own things, and my influence was always there, but this is the first time.
Did you feel generally that you were being served well and accurately by the actors?
Yes, I did, but there were a couple moments of I want control.
Sure, we all do.
And I was thinking of that, if this was done here and then somewhere else and it was completely different. I mean, does that happen to you?
What you'll find in the professional theater, once you get a commercial production, whether it's a 50-seat theater or a 1,000-seat theater, you belong to an organization called the Dramatists Guild, which is the closest thing we playwrights can have to a union, since we're not employees. And we don't work for people. We lease the production of our play. Anyway, you'll belong to the Dramatists Guild because you can't have a play produced without a Dramatists Guild contract. And that contract will say very specifically several things that are very interesting. And don't let anybody tell you that it shouldn't be this way. You will discover that nobody may change a word of what you've written without your permission. You will discover that you have the approval of who acts in your play, and you will have the approval of who directs your play. Those three things are the one-way guaranteed that you will see on stage what you wrote. So, in a commercial production, in professional production, you'll have those controls, and please never give them up. They're very important. Which doesn't mean that you're not going to learn from actors and learn from directors, and every once in a while somebody's going to say, that 45-minute scene that you wrote there in the middle of Act 2, it should be about 3 minutes long. Maybe they're right. Every once in a while they can be right. But one thing, if you're going to be a playwright, to remember is that you'll be working in a production with lots of actors, a director, lots of designers, and everything like that. But the one reason that they are all there in that room is because you wrote the play. Never, ever lose sight of that. You are not a small cog in a large wheel. You're the reason that everybody is there doing the play. And never lose sight of that, because in the tough times, when everybody's leaning on you to distort what you wrote and to give up control, you've got to keep that in mind. Very important.
Did you have situations where a director or actors were taking over your scripts?
I was very lucky in that the American producer who produced the Zoo Story in New York in 1960, a man named Richard Barr, who produced the first 18 of my plays. He died, alas. He was trying to remake the American theater into a playwright's theater. And so he thought the playwright was the most important element of the theater. And while he expected me to be a reasonable person in rehearsals, and if I'd done something wrong to admit it and change it, at the same time, he said, what the playwright wants, we must give him or her. How else will the playwright learn whether what they did was right or wrong? And so I never really had that experience. I was always allowed to make my own mistakes, which is much better than making somebody else's mistakes.
Since your first play was done in German, how did you know that what you wanted to be said was being said exactly how you wanted it?
Well, the problem, if a play is being done in a foreign language, the play has to be translated.
Yeah.
I was very lucky in that the translator of the Zoo Story and the next 15 or 16 of my plays, 18 of my plays, was a young Swiss-German actor, very intelligent man who speaks English better than I do, and German, which I don't speak at all, obviously, a great deal better. And he was also an actor as well as a director. And so he didn't just do a literal translation, word-for-word translation of the play, nor did he do a free adaptation of it. When he read the play in English, he saw it and heard it being performed on stage. And so he knew what was alive and what wasn't, what would work on stage and what wouldn't. And he translated all of that very accurately, but not as a scholar would, but as a theater person would. You have to be very careful that you are being translated properly, which is why I learned very, very young, and you must do this too, that when you have a contract for a translation of your play, that you don't just have the approval of the translator, but you have approval of the translation. That's much more important. You don't care who translates your play. What's important for you is that the result is what you want. Now, when they send me the translation of a play of mine in Serbo-Croatian, say, and I don't speak Serbian, I have to find somebody I know who speaks Serbian, whose mind I trust, and have the translation checked by a person like that. But it's nice when you start having translation. Now, when the Zoo Story was done in Berlin, very good actors and a good director, I knew exactly what they were saying because I wrote the play. Yeah. And I could follow the structure of the play and follow it emotionally. So I didn't have any problem with what the actors were doing, because they were first-rate young German actors. What I found myself doing, which was interesting, is I didn't spend much time watching the actors. I was sitting up in a box over on stage left. And I spent most of my time looking at the audience. They couldn't see me doing it. I spent most of my time looking at the audience to see how they were reacting to what I had written. And you should do that a lot. Paying a lot of attention to the way the people out there are responding to what you've done. That's the only way you can really tell whether or not you are communicating.
I have a question about technique. When you write anything, do you have like a formula, or do you find yourself writing based on a character or a plot, or do you have like anything set in mind before you sit down and begin to write?
Well, this is a very complicated matter. There's the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. I'm not a didactic playwright in the sense that I say, well, now I must write a play about the plight of the grape pickers in California, the fact that they don't have a good union. I must write a play about that. No. I discover, though I think they should have a good union, by the way, and now they're beginning to, I discover that I have been thinking about a play before I know that I've been thinking about it. So when I become aware of a play that's starting in my mind, it's been there for quite a while. And the characters are there, the destination is there, but I have no idea when I sit down to write the first page what the first line of the play is going to be, or how I'm going to get from the beginning to the end. But I know that I've probably decided most of that beforehand. And so what I do is translate the play from the unconscious to the conscious. That's the way I work. That way I avoid having to think very much.
Did you find when you were writing your plays that you became each one of the characters as you were writing their words?
No. You've got to maintain objectivity. And if you get too fond of or think about a character as being you lose all your objectivity about the character. You can't write a character that you can't imagine inhabiting. And maybe you do inhabit the character while you're writing a speech for that character, but you mustn't play favorites. You've got to really be objective. The most unpleasant people, you've got to really respect as much as the nicest ones in your play. You can't play favorites. Did that throw you? I'm sorry.
Not at all. Elliot, you had your play produced last year. Mm-hmm. And what kind of experience was that for you?
It just threw me to have to be able to see what I'd put on paper, performed. And like you said, there was that want to jump in and change something, but to see it done at one place, I mean, when you have it done at different places, does it change, or do you see a change, or do you wish there was a change?
Before I answer that question, the most important thing that any young playwright can learn is this. When you are writing your play down on paper, and don't write on a computer, by the way. Typewriter at the worst, longhand is best. When you're writing your play down on paper, while you're writing it, you must see it and hear it as a play being performed on stage in front of you. If you do that, if you see it as you write it, as a play in front of you, you won't have to make very many changes. And you can be pretty sure that if you have good actors, if you do that, if you can hear, if your ear is working well and your eye is working well and your mind is working well and you see it as a play in front of you while you're writing it, it's probable that good actors are going to be able to say all of your lines exactly the way you wrote them. But it's your responsibility to see it and hear it as you're writing it. Very important. That's the most important thing you can learn. Always keep that in mind.
Sylvia, in your play, did you know the ending before you got there, or did it happen?
No, I wrote my play over like a year and a half, but I only worked on it 4 different times because I'd write like the first 3 pages and then I'd keep writing and then I'd reread what I wrote and I would hate the last 5 pages or something and I would just like what I had in the beginning. So I had to just kind of walk away from it and come back to it.
Wait as long as you can before you write anything down. Sometimes I keep a play moving around in my head for a year and a half until it insists on being written down. Don't start too soon. Beginnings are so easy and so interesting and exciting to do, and then you get 5 pages in, what am I going to do now? Which means that you started too soon. So don't start too fast. Keep the play in your head. Think about the characters. You must know, when you write a character, you must know everything about that character. If you're writing a character and I'm the director, and I say to you, what kind of a dog did your character have when they were young? You will intuitively know the answer to it. You really must know everything about the life of your characters. And that's the only way you can write them 3-dimensionally. So don't start too soon. Wait a while. Wait until it has to be written down. So let me say one other thing, one little bit of advice to young playwrights. Don't let anybody tell you how long your play should be. A play should be as long as it needs to be. If it's 10 minutes, that's the proper length for it. If it's 5 hours, that's the proper length for it. Don't let anybody tell you how long it should be. Very important. I'm finished.
Have any of you been influenced by any playwrights that you've read? Or are you influenced by what you see on television? Are you influenced by what you see in the movies? What kinds of things influence your thinking in terms of your stories?
Television and the movies are ultimately so much more accessible, but recently I moved into New York and I've been overwhelmed with the amount that I don't know. Like theater, it's so roundabout and so dense, and so it's a lot. It's almost like television. You're told what the good shows are, but theater, it's especially in New York right now that I'm finding it's such a mystery. It's like a gamble. So I can understand why people, have a harder time.
Now you're in New York right now. Where are you finding the good theater?
Actually, yesterday I went to see a Broadway show, but I was much more moved by a little random play festival that I saw on 30th Street, like in a little hole in the wall.
I'm not surprised.
I feel really, as a young writer and a young actor, I don't really know where to seek out. I feel like there's so much I don't know.
Well, the one place you should really go to seek out good theater is not in the theaters, but in the bookstores. Read the plays. You're not going to see very many great productions of Sophocles and Moliere and Pirandello and Chekhov and Beckett. You're not going to see a lot of productions of those all over the place. Read the plays. Learn how to read the play. That's where you learn. You can see and hear a play by reading it. Don't wait to see them. Because half the time when you see a play, you're going to see one of two things. Either a production that's not as good as the play is, or a production that is better than the play is. And in both cases, you're going to see something that distorts the play. Read plays. Read them. They're literature. Read them. Don't wait to see them. It's a lot cheaper to read them, too. And you'll learn an awful lot more by reading them, believe me.
I noticed that you made like a little laugh when I said about never taking a playwriting class. Is that mostly what you did, like a lot of reading and a lot of your own kind of?
Well, I started going to theater when I was real young because my family wanted to get me out of the house. and we lived near New York, so I went to a lot of theater. But I really didn't start going to serious theater until I got thrown out of college and left home when I was 18 and moved to Greenwich Village. I never took a playwriting course in my life, except I sort of did. I had a number of very interesting teachers, like Sophocles and Shakespeare and Moliere and Chekhov and Beckett and Pirandello and all those guys. Those are my teachers, and those are the ones that are going to teach you. What most playwriting courses will tell you is how other people have written plays and what the safe way to write plays is. You don't care about that. They're not going to tell you how to write your own play. Go to the great playwrights of the past and of the present and learn how they write. And don't copy, steal.
One of the comments that you made in a dialogue that I read once was that in art, we must offer the opportunity to change who we are. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an excellent quote. And one of the things I look for in good theater.
Any play that we go to see that doesn't make us re-examine our values, it's not doing anything. It doesn't make us think about the way we live and about the way other people live. And any play that does nothing more than a TV sitcom isn't worth the 2.5 hours that you're sitting there. Theater is very, very powerful when people are allowing it to be powerful. You can change the way people think about politics, about morality, about anything you want. You can do that. But you've really got, if you're going to do that, you've got to take the chance of getting people angry and being very unpopular. But if you're not willing to take those chances, you shouldn't be in the theater anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albee. Thank you, panelists, and it was a pleasure having you here. And I want to reinforce the fact that I would love to see you go out there and make theater happen that causes us to leave the theater thinking about ourselves and about how we can, in fact, be better people. Thank you. And here we are again with our second panel, our Sunset panel. And I'd like to introduce our playwrights. First of all, to my right is Mr. Alan Ornstein, and then Mr. Chuck Anderson, and Mr. Wesley St. John. I'd like to start with Wesley. Your play, of course, was performed today. Like we did with the last panel, if you could give us a little bit about yourself, a little history.
I started in the theater in 1954 in an amateur theater in New Orleans.
As what, a writer?
No, as an actor. And I came to New York, and I worked for 10 years in the theater. I was a member of Equity. And I found the theater not to be totally to my liking. I mean,
Why?
Well, I wasn't getting enough work as an actor. I still got it. So I found myself withdrawing more towards writing, and then finally withdrawing from the theater altogether. And I have since then spent 31 years with the Long Island Railroad. It was good enough to let me sell tickets in the morning and write plays in the afternoon. And that's what I've been doing for the past 30 years. And I would like to say, Mr. Albee, that I saw Virginia Woolf in 1963, I believe it was, when it was first done.
62, yeah.
62. My wife and I sat there, and we felt like we were being pummeled in our seats.
Good.
I know a lot of people who the theater has changed so much over this period of time. They don't know what a shock it was to sit in a theater seat and to feel this just wave after wave of this anger just pouring over you and coming at you. It was an awesome theatrical experience. I thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Mr. Chuck Anderson.
Like Mr. St. John, too, I was very strongly influenced by Mr. Albee's play and the subsequent movie. I've been an English teacher for the last 40 years, and during those years I taught everybody from Shakespeare to Chekhov to Tennessee Williams to including Edward Albee. And I think that's influenced me a great deal. But I think that this is the first play I've ever written, and I find that I think I learned a lot about myself and also about the people that I was writing about. I was writing about people who were a lot older than I was, and I finally realized after I finished it that it was, in a way, a kind of tribute to people who are older, a tribute to old age, to people who have survived life successfully and gracefully. And I guess that's why I wrote it.
Don't you find as you go on that it's harder and harder to write plays about people older than you are?
Well, he's the first one.
I find it gets more and more difficult.
And finally, Mr. Alan Ornstein.
I started filling a creative urge that I had back 2,485 years ago when I went to Syracuse University, writing radio scripts and thinking Norman Corwin was the guy who invented sliced bread. I mean, to me, he was one of the really great writers. Unfortunately, I got...
Did he write any plays that weren't for radio?
Did he write any plays
that weren't for radio?
Yes, he did.
He may have written one or two other plays, but most of his work, in case somebody out there doesn't know, he was a radio playwright, an honorable occupation.
Oh, yes.
Like Sam Beckett wrote radio plays, too, by the way.
So I left Syracuse and I couldn't get into television and got sidetracked badly and went into the law business, became a lawyer for a bunch of years till I got thoroughly disenchanted, and then about 30 years ago said, I just can't do this anymore, and left the law business. During this period of time, somehow I managed to continue writing and wrote a book or two and produced an off-Broadway play for Mr. Albee said $2,000. It cost us $5,000, and it ran a month, so I still get about $16 a year in leftover royalties. And then I started writing plays. I'm not quite sure why I did. I find it easier to write. Not less demanding, but less time-consuming to write than books, and it's also an easier way for me at least, to express my own personal thinking without a lot of descriptive narrative stuff that has to go into a book. And so I write plays. It just fills that creative urge that I have.
I know a lot of playwrights who didn't start writing plays when they were 18, who waited a while, had other careers and did other things, and then decided, maybe I've learned something, maybe I should write about it now. Yeah. I'm
struck by the fact that we, I think, draw on so many experiences and people that we've known, but one of the questions that I've always had to entertain in the classroom is the relationship between life and art. How much of art is autobiographical? I was going to ask you, how much of your art is autobiographical?
Well, there's a difference between writing about real people and writing either biography or autobiography. I've never written autobiography in my life.
Well, I'm talking about...
I've never written about me.
I'm talking about people that you...
But, yeah, here's the distinction. Every once in a while, you do run into people that you find reasonably theatrically interesting. One of my grandmothers was reasonably theatrically interesting, so I put her in a couple of plays. And I've run into a few people who may or may not be George or Martha and Virginia Woolf. And you run into those people. But unless you can invent real three-dimensional people, you can't write about them. And they have to be just as real. The ones you invent have got to be just as much flesh and blood and just as real as anybody you've met. Or else you can't really write honestly about them. Very important. I think autobiography is fine if you think you're terribly interesting. But I find that most of the characters that I write about are infinitely more interesting dramatically than I am, and so I don't write about me. I write through me, but not about me.
One of the things that I noticed, I recently, in anticipation of today, actually reread Virginia Woolf, and one of the things that struck me, aside from the play itself, was that you are very, almost dictatorial in your writing insofar as direction, how you want a scene played. Toward the end of the play, you write in broad letters, "This shall be played low key." And in other places, you say, "This shall happen this way and this shall happen the other way."
That's because, as I was saying earlier, as I write the play, I see it and I hear it, and so I know the way it should look and the way it should sound.
I was under the impression that that can pretty much, perhaps not with a man of your reputation, but other than somebody like you, that pretty much can get trampled to death by directors who will say, well, that's what he wants, but that's not the way I see it.
It can get trampled to death, but it's violation of your contract, and you don't have to allow it to happen to you. Really, you don't have to. It doesn't matter whether it's your first play or your 28th play. Your contract with the Dramatists Guild says from the very beginning, no changes without the author's permission. And more interesting even, any changes that the author permits are owned by the author. Keep that in mind, too.
Wesley, we saw your play this morning. It was excellent. Where did the idea for that play come from? Any experiences of your own, others?
No, it grew out of the play itself. With this particular play, I simply wanted to write. As I recall, I had written a full-length two-character play, and I shopped it around New York, and I got absolutely nowhere with it. So I was very disappointed, and I was very angry, and I said, you have to keep writing. If you stop writing, you will just quit and give up. So I said, well, just write something. And so I started writing this play, and it wrote itself. Since I have an actor's background, I know how to create coups of theater where you change to entice an audience or to hold them. And so I would make these little changes. When he talks about the dog, when he sees the apparition of the dog going, that was a feint trying to find where my play was going. When I finished the play, I said, well, it's sort of interesting as a red herring, so I'll leave it there. But actually, I was just searching. I didn't know where that play was going until it finally got there. The last line came to me when the play was completed.
Do any of you feel that the themes that you would be writing now, that we've had more of life experiences, would be different than what your themes would be 20 years ago?
What are themes?
That's something that comes up in a playwriting course.
Yes, yes. What are themes? You know, when people ask me, what is your play about? I never know how to answer that. It's about these people and stuff that happens to them. And the play is about everything that happens to the characters from the beginning of the play until the end. And it's also about everything that went on in their lives before the play began. And if they're not all dead at the end of the play, it's about what goes on in their lives afterwards.
Well, I think that's an academic thing. We are trained in schools to think in terms of plot constructs and themes and
For example,
characterization and all of those.
What is King Lear about? What's the theme? Is it about a guy having trouble with his daughters? I suppose. Is Macbeth about a rather unpleasant family that was terribly socially ambitious? You know, any play that you can give the theme of in one sentence, the play should be one sentence long. Sorry.
You've destroyed my ability to talk about theater from now on.
Can I make a confession, Mr. Albee? Right after your stunning success with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, you were at Herbert Berghoff's studio. I don't know if you would remember that. And you sat, you wouldn't give a talk. They wanted you to give a talk, and you wouldn't give a talk. So you sat in the chair, and the students asked you questions. And I had the audacity to ask you, what was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf about?
Did I know? I hope I didn't answer you.
Yes, you did. After everybody stopped laughing, I felt like an ass. You said that catharsis is not something that necessarily happens at the end of a play, but happens from moment to moment, which from what I got from your play was a very acceptable answer.
Yeah, but I certainly didn't tell you what the play was about, did I? Or what the theme was. No, I was talking about methodology there to a certain extent, yeah. I used to joke when people would ask me, and I would get finally sort of impatient with them for asking, what is the theme of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I said, well, it is about the failures of the principles of the American Revolution. George and Martha were named after George and Martha Washington, and that Nick was named after Nikita Khrushchev, who was running the Soviet Union at that time. And it was about the arguments between humanism and totalitarianism, which indeed it was. But that has nothing to do with what the play was about. That was just sort of fun.
I find that when I write, I hate it. I will set aside 4 hours to write, and then I will find 3 hours of things to do in the area that I'm writing that it's not writing, and finally I'll sit down and I'll write, and I'll be aggravated and annoyed, and I won't be happy, but I love the end result. When it's all finished, I look and I hope, see, look what I did. Do you suffer at all?
There's a difference between writing every day and being a writer every day. Tennessee Williams, no matter how he felt, in the morning, would get up early, and then he'd been up all night doing drugs, drinking, whatever. He'd get up and go to his typewriter, and he would write for 5 hours with a pitcher of martinis in front of him. Almost everything he wrote was terrible, and he threw it away. That was his way of being a writer, that writing every day was being a writer. The most important thing is to think like a writer every day. Look at the world around you and the people around you from a writer's point of view. Just think like a writer every day. And it doesn't really matter whether you write things down every day.
Yes, but I'm talking about the physical effort to do it.
That's the end product.
I know, but that's the tough product.
Well, it's enormously involving. I find that if I wait until the play must be written down, that I just can't wait to get to my desk. But I have to wait for that particular thing to happen. And then I'll go away for a week until I have to get to my desk again. When the play tells me, knocks me on the head and say, you must write me now.
Do you think the American theater is in good shape nowadays?
What's the American theater?
Well, as we see on Broadway.
I think we've got a lot of good playwrights.
We have a lot of
We have a lot of very good playwrights, and most of them are not having their work done on Broadway.
We seem to have a lot of work done by British playwrights.
Yeah, we have a kind of, I don't know what it is. No, we have a self-consciousness. It was British. They've been, writing a lot longer than we have, and we were, there was nobody here except wonderful Indians when Shakespeare was writing, and so they know an awful lot more about it. And also it sounds so good when it's done in an English accent. I'm amazed, by the way, whenever I go to London and a play of mine is done by British actors, how much better it sounds.
Do you think there's a difference in the British actor as opposed to the American actor? in terms of their ability to connect with the emotions of the play?
I think the basic difference between British actors and American actors is British actors are less eager to sell out to Hollywood and television. That's the basic difference between them. We have a lot of fine American actors, but most of them are interested in the buck.
That is true. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure having the three of you here, and it was certainly a pleasure seeing your play this morning, and thank you all very much for being a part of it. And here we are, once again, with our third panel. I'm looking forward to this discussion immensely, because this is our panel of directors and critics. I'd like to introduce first Jeffrey Sanzel, who is the Executive Artistic Director of Theater 3, Eileen Jacobson, who has been a theater critic for Newsday, Andy Squazzo, who is a director, and Mr. Ron Pyros, who is also a director and works at Theater 3. We're here to talk about the role of the director and the critic when it comes to the work of the writer. Writing, one of the things I don't think we did not talk about earlier was the fact that writing, I think, is kind of a lonely time, only that you are there by yourself with other characters and you're doing it with yourself. But once the play is written, it becomes then a community effort. There's a collective quality that perhaps develops. Plays can be improved or destroyed by a director. And I'd like Mr. Albee, if you would mind speaking first in terms of what you feel is important for a director when it comes to your own work.
First, let me say that not only am I a playwright, but I'm also a director. I've been directing professionally in the theater, not only my own work, but Samuel Beckett and other playwrights, for 25 years now. And my hostilities are not toward the art and craft of directing, which I find a laudable and very, very difficult craft. Indeed, when I figured out when I was beginning as a playwright, I'd just written the Zoo story, and he was getting a lot of little productions around the country. And I said to myself, well, why don't I direct one of them? I wrote the play, I should be able to direct it. And fortunately, this occurred deep in the foothills of western Pennsylvania, where practically no human being saw it. I directed my own play, The Zoo Story, about a year and a half after I wrote it. It was, without question, the worst production of any play of mine I have ever seen, including 2 in West Texas. It was quite clear that I, the director, had absolutely no idea what the play was about, even though I'd written it. Or if I did know what the play was about, I had no ability to communicate my information to my actors. It was really an appalling experience. And this suggested to me that there was indeed some craft involved in directing. And so I started going around the world and watching professional directors direct my work. These became the faculty of my education as director. I watched Peter Hall direct my plays in London. I watched Alan Schneider in New York. I watched Franco Zeffirelli in Italy. I watched Ingmar Bergman in Sweden. I watched Jean-Louis Barrault in Paris. These directors became my instructors. And I kept on directing, and ultimately I emerged as, I think, somewhat better than competent director. I think I'm a sensitive and intelligent director. I know enough that when I am directing a play, even of mine, not to talk to the actors from the playwright's point of view, because playwrights think conceptually, and concepts cannot be acted. The most important thing for a director to know is that the only thing that can be acted is the moment-to-moment reality of what is happening on stage. The idea of the play cannot be acted. What the play means cannot be acted. The only thing that can be acted is the moment-to-moment reality. And that's tough for a playwright to have to live with, because he knows he's got so much more to tell them. But if you're going to be a director and direct people's work, and I've directed a lot, you have to know how to work with actors toward the playwright's goal. And the way the playwright expresses himself and the way the director expresses himself are totally, totally different matters. These days, more and more, we have a director's theater, where the directors feel that what they know about the play is infinitely more important than what the playwright knows. This is not true always, but more often than not, it's becoming prevalent. You said something about directors making a play worse or better. Here's an important rule, I think. No director can make a great play any better than it is. It's very, very difficult for a director to direct a great play and make it seem as good as it is. A director can make a bad play seem a lot better than it is. There's an imbalance there, but it's an interesting one. So I am both author and director, and I've worked very happily over the years with a number of directors when I'm not directing my own work. I do tend to poke around a little bit. I too intend to intrude and say, you know, your ideas for that character are very, very interesting, but they have absolutely nothing to do with the play that I wrote. Oh, really? But it seems, no, I'm not interested in deconstructionism. I am more interested in my interpretation of the play than I am in yours. Sometimes this works out very nicely with directors, and sometimes it doesn't.
Now, I read that you like to direct your own plays because you want the audience to see and hear what you wrote.
I want them to see and hear what I saw and heard when I was writing the play. That's why I learned how to be a director.
Now, do you think have you ever seen a director bring out more than what you had seen or heard in your play?
That's a very difficult question to answer. Quite often I will see a director bring out other than what I intended, and quite often the other has no relation to what I intended. I've seen directors do absolutely wonderful work with my plays, but I'm not convinced that what they found in my play was not already there, whether or not I consciously knew it was. I don't think they could have found it if it wasn't there. So the director is to reveal what the playwright intended rather than what he thinks the playwright intended.
Jeffrey, would you care to comment on what you feel the role of the director is in interpreting and how you go about interpreting a playwright's work?
Well, I think the most important thing a director can do is be as true to the play as possible. I don't believe in directorial concept because I think, that, as you said, that's bringing out things that are probably not there. I always start and study the text, and when I can, in the rare instances, which we rarely have out here, have access to the playwright to ask questions or to just get to know the playwright. We do now at Theater 3 a one-act play festival every year, but for the most part, it's directing revivals. In fact, Ron Pyral's directed Three Tall Women, the Long Island premiere, which I'm sure he'll speak about. And I actually have a question about, most of us don't have the advantage of having access to the director. What do you recommend, the playwright, to the playwright, what do you recommend the director do to prepare himself or herself?
Well, it's probably helpful if the playwright has a track record and you can read 8 or 10 other plays that the playwright has written. You get more of a sense of his rhythms, his voice, some of his preoccupations. But it's the playwright's responsibility to write so precisely, so carefully, that it is very, very difficult for the director to make mistakes.
I have a question then on that. You said in regard to Tiny Alice, it is indecent to fault a work for being difficult. Tiny Alice is an incredibly hard play, I find. I think it's a brilliant piece of writing, but difficult. How would you guide a director in working on Tiny Alice?
It is an absolutely, even though it is a sort of post-existentialist metaphysical melodrama, it's got to be directed as an absolutely naturalistic play. Those people don't know that they're in a metaphysical melodrama. They think they're real people in a real life situation, and that's all you can direct.
So the director should not concern the actors then with, as you said, an actor can't act a concept. They should play it as
no
beat to
actor
beat.
can act what he represents, what the character represents. He can only act who the character is.
But should the director know more than that, or is the director...
As long as he doesn't tell anybody, yeah, it's fine.
Ron, would you, you recently directed one of Mr. Albee's plays.
Well, in fact, I did recently direct Three Tall Women, and about 20-some years ago, we did A Delicate Balance, in fact, which you participated in, both of which were wonderful experiences. In fact, I'd like to comment on the fact that as a director, some plays are easy to do and some plays are hard. And basically, it's a question of if they're well-written. And well-written plays are a pleasure to do, and they're easy. They direct themselves, and the director's job is just to make sure you don't get in the way and to watch and just tune and see that things happen. So it's really, in fact, everything that you say it's very hard for me to add anything. But what you were saying about not acting concepts, to me, it's a little bit like comedy, is that comedy only works if actors play it absolutely straight.
Straight, seriously, of course, yes.
Exactly the same thing. I do have a question occurs to me is clearly the theater and film are very, very different media and work in different ways, and there are very, very few things, I think, which work well in both, and I've always felt that Virginia Woolf was one of those rare things that the film, for me, succeeded. As the play succeeded, the film succeeded as well. I just wondered whether you have a comment on that, on the differences, and to what extent plays can be made to work both on stage and in a film setting.
The basic difference between plays and film is that film is always a fantasy experience. We know that it is not happening and has not happened. We don't have to suspend any disbelief. It's artificial and fantasy. A play is an absolutely real happening experience which is always taking place at the moment that it is occurring. It is a reality experience. It's hard for a play to make that jump into being a movie. Now, when they made the film of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, they did a pretty good job, aside from casting a 32-year-old actress to play a 52-year-old woman, which, didn't suspend my disbelief. But still, I prefer the play. The movie was pretty real. It got over that fantasy and artificiality barrier pretty well. But I don't know how I would feel about seeing the film of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf if I had not written the play. So I can never have a virgin experience of the piece, seeing it in film. I can't. I was sorry about the two little cuts they made. They took about 15 minutes out of the play for the movie. And since the play was very much about the claustrophobia of people being in that room all the time, I was a little upset when they went to the Roadhouse. And it gave the scriptwriter, who was also the producer, something to write. He credited himself with the screenplay, but every single line in the movie is mine, except for two deathless lines, which I did not write. The first one was something very much like, "Hey, let's go to the Roadhouse." And I think the other one was something very much like, hey, let's come back from the roadhouse. Now, Ernest Lehman, who produced it and wrote the screenplay, he said, wrote those two lines. And since he paid himself $350,000 for writing the screenplay, as I see it, that's $175,000 a sentence. We should all be so lucky.
Andy, I think on this panel you're probably the newest of our directors. This is a field that you're just beginning to start to appreciate and enjoy. And what kinds of things are you learning about yourself, becoming a director?
When I pick up a play, and I'm glad I learned this at the very beginning, and a very good friend of mine, Jack Howell, taught me this, and it's read the play, read the play, read the play, and read the play. Keep reading the play. And then all of a sudden, maybe the pictures that the playwright had in his mind may slowly come into yours. And that's what the whole thing of the written word is the pictures that we create in our minds as playwrights, as directors, and as audience. Unfortunately, today, with TV and the fast clips, the children of today are not getting the schooling that I got. I used to lie on the rug, and the radio would be on, and I'd hear, and the door opened very slowly, and the hand came. I made that picture in my head. Today, the kids, fast clips, it's all over. Before they can even think of what they should be thinking about, it's over. They've been told what it is, and it's done. So basically, anything I've learned, I've sort of like started with just keep reading and reading and reading it, and then all of a sudden some little ideas will pop in. And then if you're fortunate to have good actors like I did today on the stage, when you start working with them and they start their pictures going, a synergy takes place, and I feel then accomplished.
It's interesting that I think that a lot of new directors are feeling that 7-second soundbite in that we have to move the play. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And where Pinter, of course, takes the pauses and uses those pauses and takes time with those pauses. But it seems now that our new directors have a need to move the play along as fast as possible and get it over with.
Too fast and too loud.
I agree.
That's the new concept. Yeah.
It is. Mm-hmm. It is.
Yes. It's so interesting. I have to make one more comment here, then I'm going to shut up for a while. Many, many changes, distortions, or sometimes improvements are made in plays in rehearsal. But here's an interesting analogy. If a string quartet and this happens to Chekhov's plays as well as new plays. If a string quartet is rehearsing a Beethoven quartet, the C-sharp minor, Opus 131, for example, the second violinist doesn't say, I don't like that F sharp. I want to play a B natural. The other musicians don't go, oh, wonderful, B natural, let's do a B natural. And furthermore, it says presto here. I don't think it should be fast. I think it should be very slow, adagio. This doesn't happen in music. Why anybody thinks it should happen in the theater, I haven't the vaguest idea. Unless the play is lousy and needs all the help it can get.
And moving on whether or not the play is lousy, let's introduce Eileen Jacobson, our theater critic.
I'm holding the fort just for...
It's a very difficult job, of course, and it's not a job that... it's difficult because most all of us in theater hate theater critics.
Only when they don't like our work.
Well, that's true. That's true. It's a necessary evil, right? That goes along with that. As a theater critic, I'm interested in a couple of things. But first of all, how do you see your role in viewing a play that is brand new for the first time? And what is your obligation to the playwright and the obligation to your readers?
Thank you. Well, as I have told people here before, I see my role as somebody who is a guide for the consumer. Just before I started being a theater critic full-time for Newsday, I wrote about consumer affairs and finances for Newsday and was helping people with their taxes and their what kind of mutual fund they should be in. And when I started doing theater criticism full-time, although I'd done it before that, I saw that as a continuation. I see my responsibility not to be toward people in the theater, but for people in the audience. Should they go to see something? Should they, save their time and their money and go stay home or go see something else instead? And I also try to offer some insights and some description of the play, because sometimes people have different interests or different tastes from mine, and I want them to get an idea of what this play is like or what this presentation is like. So they may, want to go even though I say not, or they may decide not to go even though I love something. And I like nothing more than to send people to the theater to see something that I think is wonderful and that I think will move them.
How do you know what an audience will want to see?
It's very much me. I mean, it has to be me.
I hate to do this to you, Mr. Albee, but I'm going to use one of your quotes because I like it so much. There's a difference between a critic and an audience member. One is a group of humans, and one is not. A critic should come to the theater with what he should expect of our audience: intelligence, objectivity, and an open mind. And
I have no quarrel with that. You see, there's an important difference and a distinction to be drawn between a reviewer and a critic. You want to talk about that difference?
Well, I'm not sure what you have in mind. I think that there are people who write about plays who who do have access to grind and who become sort of part of the theater culture in one way or another and care what other people think about them who are in the theater. I don't know. I personally have never felt that way. I don't know if that puts me in as a critic or a reviewer. I just feel like I'm writing for the reader, and I try to be sincere about it, and I, have tried to be honest about the way I feel, and I'm not. I don't feel that I'm of the theater world. I'm of the world of journalism.
You see, there's so many words that are very hard when you try to use them. An audience should enjoy the play. Every audience enjoys something different. How can you say it's what an audience should enjoy? Some people enjoy being hit in the face by emotion. Other people only enjoy absolute escapism. And so how do you write for the mass who are reading you? It must be very difficult.
Well, part of what you learn as a critic is to, some of the tenets of good writing in anything is to be specific. I would try not to write the audience should enjoy this. I would try to say, the scene between so and so and so and so came to life. With whatever it might be, with these lines or with the look between the two actors, I would try to be very specific because that's one of the tenets of good writing in general, is you want to have your reader see things, and unlike what's actually going on the stage, I'm writing on the page, and the person has to see it the same way as when they're reading your play on the page. So, I think there are just a lot of descriptive things that can be said.
Do you think that you can write an encouraging review of a play without telling people every single thing that happens during the play and spoiling the surprise for them?
Yeah, that's of course one of the challenges.
Yeah, I know.
Because now, if it's a Shakespearean play or something like that, I'll go ahead and tell the whole plot and just assume.
Because you know that nobody reads Shakespeare, yes.
Well, I actually obviously the opposite, but it becomes harder to write.
Okay, I'm sorry, we are going to have to close this down. I'd like to thank all of you here for participating. I would also like to say that this is a tremendous honor to be sitting next to one of the nation's finest playwrights, a playwright that will be with us for centuries. He will be studied and restudied and studied in universities and colleges, and his plays will endure for many, many, many years because of their quality. Mr. Albee, it's been an honor and a pleasure having you here this afternoon.